Empty to the Jeep, man. Who you think it gonna be? We're back with Cash Jordan to get some answers to what's going on around us with the migrant crisis. So the title of this video is going to be NYC just evicted 40,000 migrant families. Now, before we get in this video, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you're one of my day ones, you already know what to do. Hit that like button and drop a comment below. Now, without wasting any time, let's get into it.
If they kick you out of here?
I don't know, because I don't have a family here and I'm alone with my baby. And the father, he knows I'm pregnant and he's leaving.
A spokesperson for the mayor's office.
Wait, what?
He knows.
Migrants evicted from shelters face limited housing options. Okay. Like the rest of the homeless people that have been here before them?
I'm pregnant and he's leaving.
A spokesperson for the mayor's office.
The mayor said he didn't want to do it, but our shelter system is now so crowded, even families are getting kicked out. And although tens of thousands of people will soon be homeless, the city says it's got no choice but to evict them.
New York City now has permission to start bringing down the number of people at shelters by imposing a 60-day limit.
All right, that move impacts thousands of migrant families staying at these facilities, including the controversial one on Randall's Island.
The city says that many of these migrants are able to find a new place to live, whether that's with family or friends. The advocates say they are very concerned that this will lead to an uptick in street homelessness.
Do you have any family here?
No.
I'd be alone. So you'd be by yourself?
Yeah, it's difficult for me because my baby is too little.
The number of asylum seekers being housed is shrinking. City Hall says limits on shelter stays are being strongly enforced.
I don't call them eviction notices. I call them time limits.
It's not financially sustainable, and it's just not the right things to do. People should not be in shelters their entire lives.
The move comes after officials promised to crack down on illegal tent encampments in Randall's Island Park, many set up by migrants whose time at the city-run shelter has expired.
Shelters have always been designed to be a temporary stopgap until families can get on their feet. But without inclusive and supportive housing solutions, our shelter system will remain overburdened and our families will continue to fall through the cracks.
That's what I've pretty much thought about it. The point of the shelters, like they said, was to be a temporary solution and until you can get back on your feet. But if they didn't have, but if they're not giving the migrants any other options to get on their feet, then what are we doing?
So the same families invited into the New York City shelter system are now being invited to leave. But even though the city has spent over $5 billion on housing since this crisis began, what these forced evictions of families tell us is that absolutely zero people have benefited from this humanitarian crisis, except whoever got the $5 billion. Yet as bus after bus from the southern border arrived in New York, we heard from many of our elected officials how great the asylum crisis would be for everyone involved. We were told people fleeing poverty would have fantastic new lives here in America. We were told new workers were on their way, which would benefit local businesses facing employee shortages. And we were told that New York City would thrive and flourish like never before as we welcomed in the next generation of New Yorkers. But none of that has turned out to be true, and everyone has been lied to about this asylum crisis, including the very people it's named after. Because all those jobs we were told awaited the 100,000 people who've come through New York seeking asylum never materialized. And if you visit any shelter in town, you'll see the sad results of mass unemployment that still plague many asylum seekers who were promised a better future. Yet even those with work authorization can't get meaningful jobs in New York City's economy that would allow them to rent $5,000 apartments. And sadly, many folks now find themselves stuck permanently at the bottom of the city's economy. Which brings us to the real reason why the city is now evicting everyone from its shelters, including families with children, because the asylum crisis has backfired, not just on the people who are now homeless, but also on the city itself. Because although everyone getting evicted from these shelters moved in with the best of intentions, New York was not able to deliver on them. And the city has been stuck providing perpetual assistance to 50,000 families on a monthly basis for over a year. But because of this controversial new eviction plan, luxury hotels like the one down the street here are going to be cleared out in just a few weeks.
Wow. Okay. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. I'm still keeping my opinion open because I don't know. I don't have all the information. Now, I just know that if you evict people and when they have no place to stay, they are forced to commit crimes. So I don't know where I'm going with this. I just know that this whole thing is dangerous, but let's keep it going.
So this building right here, it's the Row Hotel, a former luxury hotel right here in Manhattan by Times Square. It's got about 1,000 rooms, and cleared out might be the wrong word to use with respect to what's going to happen here, because hundreds of people a week still come to New York City. But that's the problem, because in order to make room for them, the city has to kick out the people it's currently housing. And now that includes families. And for a very long time, the city did everything in its power to avoid having to do this. But critics say this is going to be a gigantic I told you so moment for the asylum crisis in an election year.
This new rule will soon apply to about 30,000 parents and children who are living in shelters all throughout New York City. Now, the city says by no means is this them just kicking migrants out without a plan. They say they will be working with these families up until those 60 days to figure out next plans for them.
So, as you're about to see, this is proof to some that the entire asylum crisis has failed. Because not only is it now making people homeless, these are the same folks we were told would always be taken care of, and we were told wouldn't need to be cared for forever because they were going to come here and get jobs and plug right into the city's economy. But as you can tell from the piles of unused delivery bikes in front of pretty much every shelter in town, that hasn't exactly happened. And to understand how hard this failure is hitting families, you've got to realize that the sudden approval of this new eviction plan is a real shock to folks who haven't just been living in shelters like the Row Hotel or the Roosevelt Hotel for over a year. No. They didn't just move in. They moved in and met with an army of city officials and humanitarian activists that promised them that they were going to be completely taken care of and that their best days were ahead of them. But now we know that's not true. Yet ever since this crisis started, when folks get off a bus at the bus terminal, they are ushered over to the Roosevelt Hotel, which is another luxury facility doubling as both a shelter and a welcome center where asylees can immediately meet with caseworkers to file their asylum paperwork, request work authorization, and get a shelter placement. Yet it now appears that after getting people moved into a shelter and their kids placed in school, all of the help kind of stopped. There was a lot of help on day one, but on subsequent days, people have just kind of been in limbo, waiting in these facilities for things to happen, like job placements, for example. And when we now look at the fact that thousands of people will soon be evicted, losing their shelter placements, many critics say that by doing this, the city unknowingly created a 65,000 strong shelter population who've been trapped in these places with no way out ever since they arrived. While at the exact same time, humanitarians are now saying that the rug is being pulled out from underneath their feet.
Immigration advocates say this change does little to help migrant families and that it will be leaving them scrambling to find a new place to stay, especially as the new school year starts. But the city says steps like this one are necessary.
So these advocates, they are 100% correct. These new sudden changes, they're not helping anybody. But a lot of these people that are upset about this, they're the same folks that have been telling us since day one that the city didn't have enough asylum seekers and that the city had plenty of resources to take care of everybody and that nobody was going to run into the types of situations we're seeing today. And even though New York is one of the largest sanctuary cities in America, it's also one of the most expensive cities in America. And even though it's possible to house people in luxury hotels for over a year now at this point, nobody seems to want to admit that that doesn't really help them get plugged into the city once it's time for them to leave. And even though many say the city's been extremely compassionate, housing so many people for such a very long period of time, this entire crisis has turned out to be nothing more than a gigantic trap for those very same people who were being housed under the impression that things were going to get better in the future, not worse. And even though the city's maintained since the very beginning how great this whole situation was for everyone involved, it hasn't been great for the asylum seekers, which is very strange because from the very beginning, we had some local officials saying that the asylum crisis was actually New York City's answer to its employment and worker shortages. During the events of 2020, many folks left the city and many businesses were unable to operate, closing down permanently. But that's the thing. Those businesses, they're now closed and they're still closed. And the companies that remain, they've adapted to the worker shortages that we've had in record time, reducing their hours, using more automation, using more app-based services so that they don't have to hire full-time workers. The jobs that many of these folks were supposed to come here and get either vanished or never existed in the first place. And although everyone was hoping that folks who came here without jobs would get them, it looks like only about 2,000 people have achieved employment so far with the city's help out of the 200,000 people that have come through this city looking for asylum.
So 200,000 people came and only 2,000. Wow. That is 10%.
And that's not a problem we can blame on lack.
It's like 2%?
of work authorization because many of the groups who come here, like folks from Venezuela, they've got something called temporary protected status, which is a humanitarian designation for folks fleeing extreme poverty, and it allows them to apply for work authorization in as little as 30 days. They don't have to wait 180 days like usual. And if you remember, work authorization has been the one thing city leaders have been complaining about this entire time, saying that the more people who have it, the less people who will need to stay in our shelters. But so many people in the shelters have it already, and the employment situation's just not working out, which means the shelter situation has had to become somewhat permanent.
Shelters have always been designed to be a temporary stopgap until families can get on their feet. But without inclusive and supportive housing solutions, our shelter system will remain overburdened and our families will continue to...
Right. So if the shelters have always been temporary and that's what they were always supposed to be, where was the plan to help people after their temporary stay expired? Where was that plan? Where was it? Because I don't...
That's pretty much what I've been wondering this whole time. Where was the plan?
See it right now, and if it did exist, it hasn't worked because many of the folks living in these facilities say they were welcomed into them understanding that their future was going to be better than their present. But at the same time, it looks like there was never a pathway set up to get people from facilities like the one behind me into an actual job where they could begin providing for themselves so that they wouldn't need to live there anymore. Yes, there was plenty of plan to get them inside the shelter and help them apply for asylum, but after that, it's like all the planning stopped. Yet every single week at the bus terminal just down the street here, 700 to 800 to 1,000 people still arrive and need a place to stay. The cycle is perpetuating itself, which means these evictions may not be the end of the asylum crisis.
I mean, not could have been.
So here we are at the Port Authority bus terminal where many asylum seekers continue arriving in the city on a weekly basis. And these are people who are
on a weekly basis.
New in town and are automatically entitled to a shelter placement. But the problem is enough people arrive here every single week that it almost offsets the numbers that are being evicted from the shelters, maintaining a sort of humanitarian crisis equilibrium here.
A spokesperson for the mayor's office confirms there are currently 49,500 migrant families in the city's care. Additionally, between August 12th and the 18th, 700 new migrants arrived to NYC, while 1,200 left the city's care. There's also no way to...
So you get 1,200 people leaving the shelters, 700 to 800 roughly on the last few weeks coming in. That may change as the months go on. And some of the people who are supposed to leave the shelters and get eviction notices can reapply for an extension or a waiver. But the real problem is in 60 days, the people who arrive at this bus terminal today will be getting eviction notices and they won't have anywhere to go. That's the real problem. And that makes the asylum crisis really more of a humanitarian recycling program that keeps people in a state of poverty from the moment they arrive until the moment they leave. That's not a good system for caring for anybody. But it's even worse for the people involved in this latest round of evictions because when they got off their bus and moved in, they were not under the impression that they would eventually be kicked out of the shelters, banned from reapplying. And it's not like they moved in 2 months ago, knowing that in 2 months they'd have to move out. No, that wasn't the expectation when they got here, which is why this is so sudden and so shocking. And even though all of this care and housing was provided to people in the name of compassion, the city has run out of resources. And now what we're showing, or what we're giving people rather, is the opposite of compassion. And to the people who've been screaming for months that compassion without resources is futile on the part of the city, this is a gigantic I told you so moment. And now the question...
That's so true. Compassion is nothing without resources. Like, that is true. Like, but when people say charity begins at home first, it's like, yo, how can I give all this money to homeless people every day? I walk down the street. I'm like, oh, here's $5. Here's $5. Here's $5. I'm still in an apartment. I gave away $100. Like, you know what I mean? $300 when I could have just saved that to buy myself a house. Charity begins at home first. Like,
question that nobody has a good answer to is, where are these people who have no resources and came from halfway across the world gonna wind up?
There's also no way to tell how many of those migrants left for other cities or how many of them are now out on the street. What happens if they kick you out of here?
I don't know, because I don't have a family here and I'm alone with my baby.
This is really sad. Here we've got somebody who's unable to work because they've got little kids and can't find childcare. They need the shelter system to take care of them, as it's been doing for quite some time. But how has the shelter system benefited her? Because yes, she moved in, but it didn't do the thing shelters are supposed to do. do, which is to help people get out of them on their own 2 feet. That was not accomplished here. And this creates a situation where you have people asking how that was ever going to be accomplished, because in New York, you need to make about $100,000 a year just to experience $36,000 a year worth of spending power after paying your rent.
Facts. Sorry, I had to pause it there just because I'm from California, another major city in San Francisco. It's the same thing going on with the migrant crisis as well. But let's be real. The same thing as that holds true for New York, holds true for San Francisco as well. $100,000 is pretty much just enough to make sure you live like you make $36,000. Because the same thing here, $5,000 a month for apartments. Yes, that's how it is over here. Yeah, same thing.
$100,000 a year just to experience $36,000 a year worth of spending power after paying your rent. This is not a city where people are able to survive on very low levels of income. Yet that's exactly what the city has expected of the folks who it moved into its shelter system to do. But here's where things get really unfortunate. Look at this. Half the families who get 60-day eviction notices from the shelter leave and do not come back. The city has no idea where they go, which means they could be anywhere. It's also worth mentioning that the city has similar data for single adults who get evicted, and now we know that they're building tent encampments all over the city because they have nowhere to go, leaving many to ask, how would families in the same situation end up any different? But the reason no one's interested in getting real answers to those questions is because if we find out that families are living on the street or living in very dangerous situations, it's going to make the $5 billion that has been earned by private companies look like a total waste of money and look very unjust, because it would mean that the entire asylum industrial complex is built on human suffering. But the real problem here isn't that you have for-profit companies making millions, billions of dollars off of this. No, and it's also not our mayor who's taking most of the blame for this crisis. No, it's something else entirely.
I can't stop buses coming in. Federal law doesn't allow me to do that. City law tells me I have to feed 3 meals a day, house them, educate 40,000 children. City law also states that I cannot have them removed when they commit a crime. I can't break the law to fulfill the law. We need to look at...
Yeah, the real reason this is all happening is because it's the law and there's no way around it, and it doesn't matter who the mayor is. They have to obey the law. But the problem is our laws are now creating homeless people, and it's costing a ton of money to do it. And these are the same people that were promised they would never be homeless when they were moved into these shelters, which is why many people are asking, are these ultimately good laws if they don't accomplish the very thing they're supposed to stop? And you know,
yeah, that's my question. It's like, yo, can't we just like rectify one real quick, redact one, whatever the terminology is, like an emergency city council meeting, like, yo, this law is killing us. We need to stop this law. Like, and I don't see nobody talking about this this new election coming up. But that's a comment for but that's a topic for another day, though. Let's be real.
Know what else hasn't worked at all during this crisis? This whole idea of universal basic income, because that's essentially what is provided to people during their temporary stay in a shelter. They've got housing, they've got food, they've got clothing, and families even qualify for $1,400 a month prepaid debit cards to help with nutrition assistance. Yet none of that helps people not be homeless at the end of their 60-day stay, or what will soon be a 60-day stay for new arrivals. Some people have been getting benefits like this for a lot longer, and it hasn't helped them. And that's because, as we now know, this entire asylum industrial complex...
Did that man say they getting $1,400 a month in aid? I mean, that's not enough to get an apartment or anything like that. But if you're getting 14, and let's say you have a wife who's getting 14, and you got a brother who's getting 14, and you got another brother, that's 56. That's an apartment. I'm just saying.
It's all been designed to be a temporary solution to people who have permanent, long-lasting problems that take a lot longer than a few months to sort out. And the reason the asylum crisis is now backfiring is because no groundwork was laid to actually help people pull themselves up and get out of the shelters on their own. And it seems like there was no pipeline to get people from a shelter system where they were unemployed into a working position to a situation where they had a job and were able to pay rent on their own. No thought really went into that. At least that's what it looks like to me. What do you think about the asylum crisis? Is that why so many people are in shelters? Is it because they are completely reliant upon the city and state? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, let's let them know what we think.
See you.
All right. Now, this is an ongoing rabbit hole that I'm still trying to figure everything out. I don't have anything close to any new answers from this video as well. I just have more questions. The only thing that I've seen that actually makes any sense is the $5 billion that was proposed to somebody to bring these people here. And I don't understand what happened with that $5 billion or why they moved them here with no opportunity to actually change their circumstances. That is above my pay grade as well. But we're going to keep going down this rabbit hole because maybe we can uncover some answers. But hey, if you made it this far, that means you're putting some paint where it ain't. And for that, you need to be thanked. So make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe, share to be aware, keeping that algorithm because I need to be there, man. Because I know there's 10 other streamers that do it like me, but
fuck that little 10. I'm maxed out.